Welcome everyone to a bonus episode number 3, and this is where we learn how to extract data from SQL and put it into Excel. Now the aim of this episode is to show you the different methods that we can get data out of SQL Server and into Excel in order for us to use it. You'll find that when you start working in SQL, a lot of people will be asking you for data dumps, etc., for them to use based on specific criteria. So all you need to do is extract data, paste it into SQL, send off the Excel file, and off you go. So we're going to first look at how to copy and paste data from SQL Server straight into Excel for you to send off any data sets. We're then going to look at some more intricate ways of actually connecting Excel to SQL databases. That's a lot more useful than just providing a data dump to someone. And then we're going to have a look at pivot tables, which are extremely important and very well used, especially by finance personnel. And you need to be able to get your head around those, because you'll find going forwards that pivot tables are really useful, especially when it comes to testing data. Now before we head off into Excel, let's jump into SSMS, run off a quick query to extract some data from a table. Here we go, we're within SQL Server Management Studio. So let's check out Wide World Importers again, and what we're going to do is we're going to grab all of the orders from sales orders. We're going to run off a quick query, grab all the data from there, and we'll put it into our Excel document. One thing I may not have mentioned in previous episodes is that you can also just simply click and drag with your mouse button a table on the left in the Object Explorer, drag it into SQL Server, into your query, and it'll bring it in as is. So that just helps you from having to type it out the whole time. Simply click and then drag it in. So what we'll do is we'll select Start From, Sales Orders, and let's see how we go with that. Execute that command. Now you can see all the data's popped in, etc. We've got a few nulls in there, all sorts going on. So what we need to do is simply ensure that you click on any cell within your result set, because if you go up here and press Ctrl A, for example, it just selects everything there. So make sure you click on your result set here. You'll see that if you click on a row, it highlights the whole row. If you click on a column, it just simply highlights that entire column. Now you can copy single rows. So if we highlight that row and right click and press copy, we'll copy with headers, which will copy with all the headers that you see here for our columns, or even for the columns. But what we want to do is we want to select all. So you can either press Ctrl A or hit the select all of the right click menu. We're going to select all, and then if you right click again, you'll see copy with headers. We're going to copy with headers. So what that's done is that it has copied all the data into the clipboard in the back end of Windows. So data's ready there, ready to be pasted. So now let's fire up an Excel spreadsheet and we'll go ahead and paste the data. Okay, so I've opened up an Excel spreadsheet here. We're using the 2010 version of Excel, a really old version, but what's important is that you can see that even from an early date, as far back as that, actually connecting to SQL Server within Excel was a very important task. So all the functionality needed is built in with Excel to do just that. So in sheet 1 what we're going to do is simply paste the data that we copied from SSMS. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to use the cell here. So all you do is right click and paste. Now it can take quite a bit of time depending on the data, the amount of data. It could take a little while to get all that into Excel. You just have to be patient, and if it doesn't come up with any errors, then you'll be fine and the data will go in. Now as you can see, everything has come in, but there's a few things that we need to look at. First of all, any null columns will be presented as nulls, and we don't really need to see all those. So what you can do is press Ctrl A, or Ctrl H should I say, and open up your find and replace. So if you type here find null, spelling right, and you leave replace blank to replace it with nothing. Hit replace all. It'll go through the list and it'll tell you how many replacements. So there you go. If we're going to send it off to someone, we need to get rid of all the nulls. Otherwise they'll come back and say, what is null? What does that mean? So we've got to get rid of the nulls there. And all the columns are very shortened, basically the same width. So if we want to increase the width of all of them, simply click and hold the first column, drag your cursor along, and then double click the little line. You see how the cursor changes from a down arrow to a bar with two arrows. Double click there, and there you go. You've expanded the fields to be the full length of whatever's in them, which is great. So what it's done is it's treating these as all numbers because they're numbers, etc. The dates are fine there. It's all looking good so far. But then you come along here and you see it's showing some weird values here. It's only showing the time. But when you click on it, as you can see at the top here, it shows the date time. So the main thing to take away from that is that sometimes Excel gets a little bit confused when it comes to the data types. So when you copy and paste data, as I've just done, it can put in some strange values in the columns. So you'll need to go in there, highlight the column, right click, and then format the cells into the correct format going forward. Here it's date time. Now Excel isn't very good at displaying date and time in the same cell, so you may have to play around with the formatting to achieve that. Once you've done that, you can just simply save it down and forward it on to whoever requested the data. Very easy, very straightforward. Then it's up to them to do what they need to do. That is it for cutting and pasting. Very easy method, very quick. And if you do have any requests where someone says, can you give me this data based on this criteria, then just run a script off in SQL, copy the data, paste it into Excel spreadsheet, and email it across to them, and it's all good. Now another way to get data into Excel, and this is by using your data connections, which will connect to SQL and bring data directly from the database itself. So let's open up sheet 2 and let's actually create a connection to SQL Server. Now the key thing to notice that this will only work if SQL Server is running in the background. So for example, if we try to connect to a SQL Server that's not actually running, and we cannot actually connect to that SQL Server because of security measures, then we cannot set up a connection. Fortunately, when we installed SQL Server to this machine, it was all under our own login, our Windows login, so we should be good to go. However, it's worth checking that your SQL Server instance is up and running and ready to connect to. And the way we can do that is if you simply go down to Start right click on that and go to Computer Management. Click on that. Window will open up, and if you go up to make sure it's on Computer Management Local, and simply click on either Services and Applications here, or if it's clicked up here, you can double click Services and Applications there. And we're going into Services, and we'll scroll all the way down to where it says SQL Server. Now what we're looking for is SQL Server. Don't worry about the other bits and pieces in there, but this is the actual SQL Server database engine that's running, and that was the name of the server when we installed it right at the very beginning. Let's just increase that a bit. Now you can see that the status is running, so we know that SQL Server is up and running. And at the start, when we first installed it, it automatically sets that to running. So whenever you start your PC or your laptop up for the first time, it will automatically get SQL Server up and running. And that, as you can see, is automatic, the startup type. So that'll happen every time you boot into Windows. It will automatically start up SQL Server, which is great when you're working with it. But if you find that your PC starts to run out of resources, CPU and memory, and you need to shut some services down, you can simply right click on that and you can stop the service. But remember, as soon as you stop the service, you won't be able to connect to it within Excel. You can then restart. Once it's stopped, you can start it, and you can also hit Properties and you can stop it from there as well. And then you start at type automatic. You can change that to manual, do whatever you want. At this point in time, it's not giving us any issues or problems with SQL Server. It's not chewing up too many resources, so we're happy to leave that running every time we start the PC. Let's close that one down, head on back into Excel, and let's see if we can create a connection. All we need to do with that is simply head on into the Data tab. Click on that, and there you go. You'll see a whole lot of connections on the left that you can connect to bring in data. Now, in later versions of Excel, especially when the new Office 365 environment, these options here on the left could be quite different. You might just get a button here called Get Data with a whole lot of drop-down options which list some of these. So in 2010 and a lot of the versions after 2010, we've got these buttons here, and what we're after is from other sources. And you can see that little database diagram next to your spreadsheet there. Hit the little drop down there and it'll give you a variety of options. So Wide World Importers is a database on our SQL Server instance, so we're going to connect to that. Later on, when we go over analysis services in a much later program, we'll be connecting with that, but for now just click on From SQL Server. The data connection wizard will pop up, and first of all we need to tell it which server we want to connect to. So if you don't know the name of that, or if you've forgotten, then just simply head on into SQL Server Management Studio. Let's do that quickly. And this is the name up here. Now to get that quickly, all you need to do is simply go up to Connect. It'll open that window. That's all highlighted. Simply right click and hit copy. So now you've copied the server name. Head on back into Excel. There we go. Right click and paste, and you've got the server name. Now we know that we set it all up with Windows authentication, and that's how you log into SSMS. So it's exactly the same methodology when logging into SQL Server from Excel. So we'll keep using Windows authentication, hit next. It'll try to connect. Once it's connected and it's happy, it'll give you the option to drop down and select the databases you want to. As you can see, you can connect to any and all of the databases within your instance. Now, Wide World Importers has popped up straight away because we've set that one as our default database. We'll leave connect to a specific table ticked over there, and here you go is the list of tables that we can actually choose from. Now you can also connect to views in later versions if views are available, so you can connect to a view instead of a table to pull the data in. So what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down, we're going to find orders, it's in the style schema, we're just going to select orders, we can either click next or finish, let's click next, and it'll tell you a bit of information. So that's the file name there. You can put in a description, you can change the file name if you want to. Here's a friendly name. Basically that's your SQL Server connection. There's your database and there's your table. And we then just need to hit finish if you don't want to adjust any of those there. ODC is a type of database connection. Let's hit finish and see what happens. Next, it'll take you to the import data screen where you can either create it as a table, a pivot table report, etc., and it'll also ask you where you want to put it. If you want it on the existing worksheet and the cell, you can see it, the flashing lines going on there, so it'll put it in that cell there. You can of course change the cell you want to put it in, or you can simply put it in a new worksheet. We're just going to import the table into that first cell. So hit OK, and there you go. Straight away it's linked in and brought the data in. Now it's brought it in as a table. Let's zoom in a bit so you can see everything going on. There's quite a lot of data. Now, a couple of things to note. First of all, you see how it hasn't put in any nulls, whereas if you copied and pasted the data, it would do just that. So any nulls are blanked off and not showing anything there. You can change the table style as well. It defaults to this one, but the nulls are gone, which is great. And we've also got the date times coming through correctly. So importing a table as a table into Excel by connecting to it seems to work a lot better than copying pasting the data as we've seen there. So we've got this table. Let's see what we can do with it. So what we can do with it, obviously we can send it off to people, and the great thing about this table is that by hitting refresh or going to data and hitting refresh all, it will go away back to the database and refresh this table, which is great in, for example, a month time if you need to refresh the data to send on to someone, or they themselves can do it themselves. All they need to do is hit refresh all and the refresh date will pop up. And that's pretty much it for connecting to Excel. If you want to see the properties of your connection, head up here into properties, and it'll ask you which one. There's a few things that are automatically ticked. We normally keep those as is, as standard, because those are fine. If we click on connection properties, then it'll take you to your actual connection itself. That's the name. And if we go on to definition, here you'll see our actual connection string. Now there's quite a lot going on in that connection string, which is automatically built for us, thankfully. Remembering how to do all this could be a bit of a pain. And here's the command tag, so that's just pulling a table as is. You can change the command text if you want. You can type in different tables, you can type in select from views, or you could even execute stored procedures in later versions of Excel. Pretty straightforward. We'll cancel that, come out of that, cancel that. So that is just bringing in data in as a data table straight out of SQL. No cutting and pasting is involved. Once you've set up your connection, then it's all good, ready to go. Heading into design will let you play around with a few options on that table. So what can we actually do with this data now in this tabular format? Well, we can start to look at the data in a pivot table. Let's head on to sheet 3 and let's start creating a pivot table. All you have to do is simply go to your new sheet there, head on into insert, and you see on the left here it's got pivot table. There are a few drop down options, pivot table, pivot chart on this old version. Let's hit pivot table and let's create a table. First things to ask for then is a table or range. So that is where the data is that you want to extract. So let's have a look. As you can see, the cursor is in that little text field. Make sure it's in there if you want to set the table and range. We'll go to sheet 1 and we'll select A1, click and hold, and go all the way down, all the data that we want. This might take a little bit of time, so what we'll just do instead, highlight that top row, press Ctrl Shift and down, and that selects all the data. Now as you can see, it's given us our range, etc., all the way down to 73,000 rows there. And what we'll do is we're going to create the pivot table in the existing worksheet, which was worksheet 3. As you can see, it says sheet 3, and that's the cell we're going to put it in, A1. There we go, hit OK, and we have our pivot table itself, which we can play around with. That's one way to set your pivot table. The problem with this is that we've set it for a specific range on this data. So what if we then paste a different set of data in that maybe has a few more rows on the bottom? The problem is our pivot table that we've just set up may not actually be able to compensate for those additional rows, so you'll start to lose data. A better method, and let's start put in a new one, sheet 4, to create your pivot table, is to use the data table that we set up in sheet 2. So instead of specifying a range, what we're going to do is specify a table. So head on into sheet 2, press Ctrl A within that cell, any cell, and as you can see, it will come up with the name of the table itself. So that's what we want, is the table name itself. We want to put it into sheet 4, that cell there, then you just hit OK, and there you have it. That's our connection to the table. The great thing about that is that when we refresh the data here and the table grows or shrinks, the pivot table will know that because it's referring to the table and not to a date range or a range of cells, it'll know to compensate for those changes. Alright then, now we're connected to an actual table. There is a third way to create your pivot table, and that's to actually base it on the connection itself. So let's head on into sheet 5 and we'll insert another pivot table. So we've got the option to select a table or range, which is great. We can also use an external data source, which we click on that radio button, choose connection. Now we've already set up a connection to that table. Let's go ahead and find it, and it's this one up here. So let's double click on that. Hit OK. Yeah, we're happy for it to go in there. And you got the same thing. So now this is not reliant on a table of data that you have to bring in and refresh. It's just reliant on the connection itself. So could be a little bit of time longer to generate the pivot because it keeps referring back to the database as opposed to referring to a static set of data that's in your spreadsheet itself. But as data changes, it's probably a quicker and easier way to do it. So that's your way to set up your pivot table. A few differences: using a cell range, using a table, and using a direct connection into SQL Server. So pivot tables, if you haven't used them before, they are extremely useful ways of representing data, and what they're really good at is aggregating data. So for example, if you want to see things per year or per month or per week, you can do all that in your pivot table. It will aggregate things up. That's what it's automatically set to do. So let's have a look at that aspect in action. So if you look on the right, it's got our pivot table field list. Now you can actually hide that, put it on by clicking on field list here, and if you see our cell that we've selected is within the diagram, if we click on out of it, that will disappear from the right. So all we need to do to bring it back is click within the pivot table. And of course, if you still don't see that, it's probably because this is turned off here. Let's just make sure to turn it on, and let's build a quick pivot table. So for instance, we've got a list of customers with a customer ID in there, and we've got a list of order IDs. So if we wanted to say, for example, let's see how many customers have actually placed orders, or should we say how many orders each customer has placed with us. What we can do is simply, you can either click on the checkbox here, like so. As you can see, it puts it in values, which is not what we want. So what we're going to do instead is click and hold that, drag it down to report labels, release. Let's get rid of that by clicking and holding, just drag it up in there. Now we've got our customer IDs as row labels coming up the side. So whatever happens, all orders, etc., will be aggregated towards these customer IDs. So you won't get separate customer IDs, the same ones for every order placed against each customer. They will be aggregated up. And I'll show you that right now. So we want to see how many of each customer, how many orders each customer has placed. So we want a count of the order IDs. Let's drag the order ID down and into the values column. Now, customer 1 obviously hasn't placed over 4 million orders. What it's done is defaulted to the sum. So because the order ID is a numeric value, it assumed that you wanted to just add them all up. That's what we don't want to do. What we actually want to do is to count them. We want to count, we want to say how many orders, not the total of the actual number. So there's a little drop down arrow here. Simply click on that, go to value field settings, and you see you've got a way to summarize that field. And remember, when we were going through the program, we looked at aggregate functions, sum, count, average, etc. All sorts of different things, variance, standard deviation. What we're going to do is we're going to do the count of the order ID instead of the sum. And there you have it. That looks a lot more reasonable. So customer number 1 has placed a total of 129 orders. Now, one thing to remember is that there is the aggregate of all the data within your connection, within that table. So the orders were over a period of 4 years, so that count of the order ID is over a period of 4 years. That's how many they've ordered over 4 years. But what if we wanted to see how many each customer ordered over a specific date range? Well, we have got report filters, as you can see here. So let's go ahead, drag the order date down into report filter, and you'll see on the left your filters will appear above the actual pivot table itself, the data part of the pivot table. So now let's have a look at filtering these results. Click on that drop down. Initially it says all, and you've got a few options in here. Let's see if we can't really scroll down. So let's have a look at that. First of all, when you go in, you can see that select multiple items is unticked. So what we can do is we can only select one item at a time. If we go for that first one, click OK, you can see already most of the customers haven't ordered on that specific date, so they're not shown here. So effectively, if there is no data, it will not show it. It will only show results if there is actual data. But what if we wanted to see the data for the entire month of January in that year, for example? We'll click on there. Let's select multiple items, and it changes to having a little drop box there. Now you can select all or deselect all by simply clicking on there, and let's select a few dates there. Obviously it's a bit difficult because we've only got a date range here on days. If we had years, months or weeks even, it would be a lot quicker to select those. Let's select a few of these. We'll select all of January. We'll hit OK. Now we'll select multiple items. There you go. So a few more results have popped in within a single month, within 2013. These are the amount of orders that these customers have ordered. A few more, but there's a few missing, like customer 1, customer number 9, etc. So as you can see straight away, you can get some good figures just by playing around with the pivot table. You can add more rows, more counts, etc. If we do a few more things, we'll pick by person ID, we'll just chuck that in there. You can see that it just adds it to the next column. So if you've got various measures, various sums, various counts, etc., we can simply add them on and they'll show as various columns as soon as you add them to the values tables. Let's get rid of that. Now there is another option. We've got the column labels, for example. So if we instead put order a date into the column instead, as you can see, it becomes a little bit more complex. So customer 2 has ordered nothing for most of the days, but then he ordered on the 5th of January, and so on and so on. This is how many orders are broken down by customer, by day. There's a lot going on, as you can see, a lot of blank values. So not particularly useful for us. You can also filter, doing a manual filter. If we select all, for example, you can see that it becomes a massive pivot table with figures all over the show. So we can't really glean any useful information from this. So if we instead put the order date back up and try to keep the amount of columns low, we'll get some useful information that way. And of course, if you want to remove columns or items within these 4 little cells, just simply click and hold and bring them up like that, and that just gets rid of them. So that is pretty much it for pivot tables. You've got all the options up here. I would recommend that you have a go and play around with importing data into Excel on the different ways we've shown. Copy and paste is by far the quickest, but you may have to then manipulate the data types that are brought in, connecting and bringing in a table via the connection, probably a little bit better and more useful. And of course, you've got the pivot table to show you results aggregated by sums or counts or averages, etc., etc. Play around with those, get used to those. I know for a fact that almost all the interviews I've been on for SQL roles, they've asked me if I know about pivot tables and how to use them. So definitely get your head around those. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of this bonus episode. Some really fantastic Excel skills being shown to you there. Give it a go, give it a bit of practice, and I'm sure you'll get used to data connections and pivot tables in no time at all. Thank you for joining me on this episode. We have one more bonus after this one. Until I see you then, have a fantastic day.